Today we're going to talk about an interesting topic. We're going to talk about addiction. As a psychology major and a recovered addict myself, I have unique insight into this subject, and alongside bringing the Watchtower Society to its knees, I've also made it a life goal to improve conditions by trying to eliminate or at least lower the amount of drug use in my area. Okay, let's get into it. Being a crusader for addiction counseling, you guys are probably wondering why I said recovered addict instead of recovering addict, and why the title of the video is Don't Follow the 12-Step Program. We'll get into the last part in a minute, but the reason I don't call myself recovering is because I don't consider myself recovering. I consider myself recovered. Calling yourself recovering is part of the 12-Step Program, and I think it's complete bullshit. And for reference, this doesn't just apply to alcohol. They have Narcotics Anonymous too, NA. And I went to a few of those groups when I was recovering. It's the same thing. Same steps, same process, same chips, same everything. That being said, let's start off with the first step. Step 1. We admitted we were powerless over drugs or alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Seems fairly harmless, right? But I don't feel like it is. It's priming you to feel helpless without this specific program. When getting clean, you must understand that you have a hard road ahead of you, and you're better off without it. But I've known people who got clean on their own and stayed clean. It's a lot more likely if you go through some kind of program, but you'll see a constant pattern of making people feel helpless and reliant on something. Let's continue. Step 2. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Okay, what do they mean by a power greater than ourselves? That's kind of ambiguous. And what does it have to do with addiction? Why do I need a power greater than myself to restore me to sobriety? Can't I be restored to sobriety through hard work and the assistance of a group of friends and counselors who support my efforts? This is confusing. Next one. Step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Okay, now it's getting stupid. What does God have to do with this process? This step could just read, "Get saved by Jesus," and it would have the same meaning. Why do I need to be saved? I'll tell you exactly why this step matters. Because this program is trying to replace an addiction to a substance with God. They both act on the brain in similar ways. What happens when your faith is challenged? It seems like a dangerous road to go down. No, this is a bad step, and it should be completely removed. The person should find an internal reason to quit, not an external one. I've seen many people quit for the sake of girlfriends or a child. The problem is that if that girlfriend takes off, or if you get into a fight with your son or daughter, you go right back to it. It wasn't genuine. You didn't have an internal reason. You didn't want to stop because you're hurting the people around you, or because you don't like who you are when you're high, or because you're sick of being sick all the time. You quit because you didn't want some specific person to think less of you. Remove this step and replace it with, "We found an internal reason to quit." Step 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. I can see why this could be useful. It could push somebody into finding an internal reason to quit, realizing what kind of horrific things they've done when they were high or to get high. Stealing, lying, hurting people. I'd keep this step, but I'd place it further up the list. It should be near the top, maybe 1 or 2. Step 5. Admitted to God, ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Why is God in that list? What does God have to do with this, aside from the fact that He's replacing the addiction itself? If you dropped God from the list, I can see how this might be useful. Maybe saying the wrongdoings out loud would make it real for somebody, make them accept what they've done. But don't give me any of this, "I've had sex before marriage" garbage. It would have to be real wrongdoings, like stealing or hitting somebody. If it were real to them, it might make the motivation to quit stronger. Step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. What? Why is God peppered through this whole fucking list? We're ready to have Him remove our defects? I'm sorry, but I view God as a defective character. Let's start by removing that. We could take this whole step out and it would only make this list better. Step 7. Humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Worthless step. Nobody can remove our shortcomings. Only we can change how we act. We shouldn't be pushing the burden off onto somebody or something else. Take responsibility for your actions and change them. Don't rely on somebody else to fix it for you. Step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Now this one I can agree with, except usually there's a bit at the end that says, except where it would cause harm to do so. I think that's fine, but it's going a little bit overboard. I don't think this step is specifically required. Maybe try to make amends. It isn't a hard and fast rule. Try making amends after you've gotten yourself back on your feet. Then your amends can come with tangible changes. Step 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Oh, I guess I was skipping ahead. Repeat yourself much? Well, like I said, it isn't a hard and fast rule, and I feel like the amends would mean a lot more coming from somebody who had some sober time under their belt. Put this one further up the list. Maybe do it after 3 to 6 months of being clean. Step 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Okay, are 12 steps really required? I could have cut this list down to like 4 things. Yes, take a personal inventory. That's very important. It's like the first thing you should do. Let's move on. Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Oh, come on. I'm gonna be sick. What does this have to do with recovering from drugs or alcohol? You need to be actively doing things to move toward a goal. Come on, people. This is like a church advertisement. And finally, step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Obviously, step 12 is intended to try to get these people who have just replaced drugs or alcohol with Jesus to make other people replace drugs with Jesus. Jesus is not an internal reason. The first time your faith is challenged, you risk falling right back into it. There's no longer a reason to stay sober. Jesus is a terrible reason to get clean. Get clean for yourself. So I've been talking shit about this program for about 5 minutes, but this has ostensibly done a lot of good in the world, right? Let's take a quick look-see at some of their statistics, shall we? I'm going to be nice and generous with these statistics, and I'm going to take them right from Alcoholics Anonymous. According to their study, 27% of the participants stay sober for less than a year, 24% stay sober for 1 to 5 years, 13% for 6 to 10 years, 14% for 11 to 20 years, and 22% for longer than 20 years. Usually I address cults on my channel, so I know this is kind of an odd change of pace, but many feel like Alcoholics Anonymous is a cult. They have family members who've gone through it and won't stop talking about it, or talking about God, constantly. They cram it down people's throats, much like a cult would do. Proselytize non-stop. Aside from the fact that I view proselytizing about God non-stop as inherently harmful, AA is actively encouraging people to find an external reason to quit. Seriously, what happens when their faith is challenged? I have a better list to help you get off drugs. Here's my list. 1. Consider all the bad things you've done over the years. Think about why you don't want to do them anymore. 2. Cut off all contact with anybody who was ever associated with drugs. Change your phone number, move to a different neighborhood, whatever it takes. You'll never be able to quit until you get out of that environment. 3. Find a hobby. Scrapbooking, learn to play an instrument, learn computer programming, anything. Find something to occupy your time and your mind. 4. Build up a support network. Friends and family who are clean and want you to be clean too. 5. Find somebody you can talk to about your feelings and problems. Drug counselors are an ideal choice. Maybe find a drug or alcohol support group led by a trained and certified drug counselor. 6. Realize that you are the only one who can affect change in your life and that you're responsible to take action to keep yourself clean. I've told this story on my channel before, but I was addicted to drugs for a few years. It was after my family started shunning me for leaving the religion, but ultimately I can't blame anybody but myself. When I first started to get clean, I was going to secular group counseling sessions. It was fantastic. I was paying like $200 a month to go to these groups. I loved it. I told my stories and other people told their stories. We all became good friends. We saw each other through the pain, physical and emotional. The place was owned and administrated by ex-drug addicts. I'm not saying you have to be an ex-addict to be a drug counselor, but it's a lot easier to relate to our situation when you've been through it too. It took me years to pull my life back together, but eventually I got to the point where I was sick of going to group counseling. The people were still great, but I started to see the fakers, and it bothered me a lot. At a certain point, I just didn't want a reminder of the fact that I was once an addict, so I stopped going. And ever since, I've called myself a recovered addict. I've been clean for almost 6 years now, and I'm a drug counseling activist as well as a religious activist. You don't need God in your life to get clean. If God is your sole motivation for getting clean, you're much more likely to relapse. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Follow me on Twitter, Patreon, and Facebook.